Welcome to Montessori 101, a live show from Child of the Redwoods, all about the magic of Montessori. We believe that every child deserves a Montessori education. I'm Aubrey Hargis.
And I'm David Hargis. So whether you're live, hello out there, or you're watching the replay, hello out there. Maybe you're listening to us on podcasts. That's great. Whichever format, doesn't matter. We're just happy that you are with us. If you'd like to learn more about our work, you can head over to our website, childoftheredwoods.com.
Great. Yes. So today we are talking about our next installment of the Montessori Essentials series that we've been doing on YouTube.
Yeah, we started this back in January, and here we are almost a half year in.
Yeah. The list is 21 essential materials.
That's
so
right.
We're really making our way through. And today's topic is those small national flags. So, we will tell you all about it in this episode.
Absolutely.
If you want to get a copy of the entire 21 essentials list, you can go to childoftheredwoods.com/essentials, and you can just download a copy of the whole thing.
Okay, well, let's jump into it.
All right. So let's explain what flags are.
Absolutely.
What flags
and
are we talking
I see
about?
hi, Janelle. Thank you for joining us live. If you have questions or comments while we're discussing, put them in the chat.
Yep.
We love conversation. Okay, so what are we talking about? We're talking about, like Aubrey said, those small flags that you see. You've seen them in geography classrooms. You'll see them in a lot of elementary classrooms. They are famous for being part of the Montessori curriculum. They're usually made out of cloth. They're about 3 by 5 inches or so. They're small. Sometimes they're made out of paper or
small
plastic.
postcard size little flags.
Yeah. Doesn't matter what they're made out of. I mean, I think cloth is traditional, but basically these are the flags. Now, there are other kinds of flags we study in Montessori. There's the pin map flags, which are very small, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I know there are activities where you would color a larger version of the flag, like you might an 8.5 by 11 sheet size. Could be something I've seen painted or colored or watercoloring. So there's different kinds of activities you might do in Montessori and in non-Montessori classrooms, or cutting out shapes or whatever to make a flag out of colored paper. Right? There's all kinds of fun things you can do with flags. In this case, what we're talking about are the little desk size flags. They're big enough to show some detail, but not enough that they would be overwhelming. So you could have an array of them. And that's kind of the point. We're going to talk about that in just a second, like why these specifically versus some of these other kinds of flags.
Yeah, I want to say that in a Montessori classroom, traditionally what you would see is the flag displayed on a little stand.
Mhm.
So there would be a little stand for
Yep.
each flag, and they would just line the top of a shelf.
Yes.
Much like we line up the colored pencils,
Yeah.
or the metal inset type of work. You would see an array of colored pencils, one of each color. And in the same way, you usually would see on top of the geography shelf a row of little flags that are all on their individual stands.
That's right.
And so that's like the classic approach to setting them up. But you also could have just a little bundle of flags in a vase, or we'll talk about alternatives later as well.
We will.
Make your own little flags, right?
Yeah. So again, the idea is that they're small enough now
Yes.
that you can sort of display them. And in Montessori, in our approach to Montessori and Child of the Redwoods, when we did our analysis of the subjects and the lessons, we created a framework of 10 academic subjects, and we debated a lot where to put geography because it's often in physical science, but we felt that there's also a subject area that we call humankind. And the question was, do flags and study of things like political geography go in humankind, or does it go in physical science? And we determined that physical science is about the earth as it exists as this natural thing predating humanity, right? The earth came before human beings on the earth. And then humans showed up and we started naming and describing and owning things like, I'm going to carve this piece out, and on this side of the mountain is mine, and on that side of the mountain is yours. And that's called political geography. So in our approach, we would say that humankind would include history, culture, human anatomy, evolution, and political geography, things that are about how do human beings start to define and organize the world. It's a real linchpin kind of subject area before, comes after the physical science and the life science, but before you get into the languages and arts and so forth. And it's kind of this fulcrum point. And that's kind of why we decided to put it under humankind. Now, in some sense, it doesn't matter where you put it, but we like to sort of think about how we organize it, because it helps us make sure that when we're teaching kids, we're giving them a really robust diet. We want to make sure they're getting a balanced diet of all the kinds of things.
So the important part of having political geography be a part of either the primary or the lower elementary classroom is for one primary reason, right? It's a gateway to culture.
That's right.
So it is an entry point to studying humans, humanity, people celebrations around the world. Like, it is an entryway into all of those kind of good topics that we have our kids research.
That's right. And we actually, so we have an example here of the kinds of things you might do. We did a theme recently, or it was last year, we did a theme. It's in our store now. It's called Folk. And it covered all kinds of things that would be in the humankind area: folk music, folk tales, folk dancing. So there's a version of stone soup. There's a recipe, and there's a activity that we included. I wanted to show here that kind of gives you a sense of what you might do. Now, these aren't the little flags that we're describing per se, but you could imagine having this is the Mexican flag, the Papua New Guinea flag, and this is a 4-part card activity if you're just listening. So, the control card and the fourth part, and so the 4-part card, and several of the different countries, and the child would sort of learn about the flags, the origin of the flag, its history, and get a sense of what it looks like, and then compare those to multiple, all kinds of different countries from around the world, so they get a sense of like all these people are our neighbors. They have maybe different flags and different ways of describing it, and they have different histories of how they developed this thing. But at the end of the day, we're all humans. And that's, within this same pack, we have that story of stone soup, which also is about, it's a very famous story, right? About everybody brings a little bit and then you have a feast. And it's this wonderful story about like sharing and combination and how
community. Yeah. Collaboration. So the fun thing about Stone Soup is that we wrote it as a play for you to act out with your children. So a lot of our members in Constellation acted them out with, I don't know, sometimes they use little peg people, and sometimes they use their children's dollhouse figures or just like little toys. Yeah. One of them used like the little figurines that came with Paw Patrol, I think. And just like, it doesn't really matter what you use, whether you're physically acting it out. We have parts for like Villager 1, Villager 2, Traveler 1, so it's written formally like a play. And if your child was in lower elementary, they could act it out. They could like read it themselves. It would be great for them to practice.
So this is a good example too of
but even with the littles, like the adult would narrate. Yeah. What were you going to say?
I was going to say this is a great example of the interdisciplinary nature of Montessori too, right? Because it's a folk tale, so that's humankind, but it's also literature, which is reading and writing. So it's all there, and special. Are you ready? We actually are offering this on sale for the next 36 hours. You can go and get Folk right here for 50% off in our store. So if you're interested in the kinds of things that we do in our community, this is a great way to sort of experience that. 50% off the packet. It's a digital download. You get it right away.
David and I actually were talking about today's episode. We were kind of brainstorming about flags this morning. And then this idea just kind of popped to us. We were like, we should put Folk on sale. So anyway, so Folk is on sale, and you can go to childoftheredwoods.com /sale. And you can get it for 50% off. It's only going to be 50% off for today, which
36
is
hours.
June 27th here in Pacific time, midday, and tomorrow. So June 28th, 2023. All right. So Folk will be on sale.
So anyway, it's got a bunch of fun activities. You can go check it out. childoftheredwoods.com /sale.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So
let's talk about flags.
Yeah, let's talk about flags. So, you actually did a little bit of research about this,
That's
right?
right.
And we were kind of wondering, well, how many flags are actually out there? So, obviously, on your little Montessori shelf at home, you're not going to display all of the flags in the world, are you?
Well, I think you'd have to start by deciding how many flags there are in the world, because
And
I mean, actually, I don't really know for sure. Because
yeah.
if you look it up, the UN, according to Wikipedia, the source of all human knowledge, apparently there's 193. You'll find that in a lot of different sources. 193 national
Hmm.
flags flown
Does
by
that mean that there are
sovereign
193
states. No, it
nations?
does not, because other sources say there's over 250 flags.
Okay.
And actually, this kind of gets to the point of why we study flags in the first place, or this kind of flag, because and this is something, just to be real clear, this is not a concept that your littles are really going to grok onto, right? They're not going to quite get it yet, but you're leading them along the way. And you as an adult might find this very interesting, because what are flags? Flags are symbols. That's why we put them in humankind. There's something that a human created, or a group of humans created, to represent usually territorial claim, right? But the thing that's interesting, and this is, the heady thought that's important, territorial claims are only as valid as your neighbors agree, right? So Canada can claim that it owns the United States,
Hmm.
but it's not likely that anybody with any authority will recognize that, because power,
Right.
because territorial dimensions, because political history, because of might, right? So this is, and that's where the thoughts go. So when we look at a flag, we're looking at a symbolic
Mhm.
representation of a place that is also tied with music and food and culture and anniversaries and celebrations and all the sorts of things, as well as somewhere on this beautiful earth, somebody on a representation of it called a map drew a line and said, this is mine and that is yours.
Now, sorry, I'm so sorry, but this actually calls to mind a real example in our primary curriculum
Oh yeah,
where there are countries out there, people who are members of our programs who consider themselves part of a nation that
definitely.
is not recognized by the United States. It's
Absolutely
not
right.
on a lot of the websites of lists of countries. So it can be very contentious. What is a country? What is not considered a country? Who considers themselves part of what?
Totally.
And sometimes there isn't like a right answer, and that
Well, it's
and
a
all of
political
that, it's a
answer.
political answer, and all of that is fascinating and interesting. And so a lot of times the trouble that I think we as the Montessori community, we get into with these kind of political geography studies is if you once you start looking at globes and maps, you start realizing more and more, well, wait, why isn't this marked? And did they leave this out on purpose?
Mhm.
And what's going on here? Oh, this globe was made by, in this country, and this globe was made in this country. And could that be why? Or did they just forget to
Yeah, for
put
sure.
something? And it can
Yeah.
get very confusing, and it can actually even feel angering, once you realize how complicated geography
I mean, it's
is,
like that
right?
old song that
And how
the
quickly it changes too. Countries pop up, countries are absorbed
totally.
into other countries. People of that country still feel like they're have their own country. I mean, it just like happens all
I
the
mean I mean, sure,
time.
everyone out there is able to imagine lots of places that would fit this. And actually, it reminded me of that comic. There's an old song. It's from the 50s, and then the Mighty Giants covered it. And that's Istanbul is Constantinople, not
That's right.
Right?
I know
So
it's one of our
a
favorites.
really fun, kid-friendly song. If you haven't heard it, you should go listen to it. And it's about how Istanbul was once Constantinople, but
Right.
the name changed because the owner changed, and that happened a long, long, long time
Mhm.
ago. But the cascade. I was also thinking about globes. We're going to talk about globes in a couple months as one of our
Mhm.
essentials. If you buy an old enough globe, old enough meaning globes that were made when I was a kid, you'll find Soviet names all over Asia and Europe that don't exist anymore. These countries do not exist anymore. Or if you went back far enough to before World War One, you'd find all kinds of places in Europe that don't exist anymore. And if you went even further back, you wouldn't even find the places that you expect, because like Italy was still ununified and Germany was still ununified fairly recently when we think about it in like the grand historical scale. So it's dynamic, it's changing. And even to this day, there are questions. Whose island is this? Whose plot of land is that?
Right.
And who backs them up kind of can make the difference. Who recognizes it? This is a very heady subject, right?
Mhm.
You're not going to probably dig into this with your 3 or 4-year-old, maybe. But this is something that you're thinking about because ultimately that's why we study things
I think
like
that
flags.
you might dig into some of it with your 3 and 4-year-old if you happen to study a particular country that is involved in a political conflict.
But I would
and
say
might
that
be-
that's true. But I would say that it's not until they get into that second plane and they start to have kids in the second plane when they start to think about right and wrong in a really different way
Mhm.
and moral certainty and wanting to ask those questions like what makes something right, what makes something wrong. That's where it gets really, really interesting.
That's right.
But that's why you would introduce flags to your primary age kids so that they are versed in the language of symbols that
Mhm.
humans use. So why is it an essential? It's an essential because it symbolizes so much about the human experience. And even though the lessons that you're going to give to your little ones are going to be not quite as deep, it's a gateway. And we're of the mind that we don't hold back. We always were ones to have conversations at a higher level if they were interesting to us in front or with the kids. And they didn't get it all,
Mhm.
but they're like, we've talked about this analogy before. They're a cup. They'll fill as much as they can and they won't hold any more. You're not going to break them. And in fact, exposing them to those languages and to that language and idea, those ideas is is doing more than you can imagine to help them. So I see we have a few comments in the chat. I'm just going to take a look. Love
Yeah.
pin maps. They are
Mhm.
fun. That is for sure.
Yes, it's a lower elementary material.
Yeah, and have an old globe with West Germany. Yes,
Mhm.
those old globes are really interesting when you find those. Yeah,
They
older.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so the answer to the question we posed, how many flags do you need? I
You don't
think
need whatever it is, 192 or
you definitely don't need
256
one
or
of
whatever it
everything.
is.
Yeah. And in fact, even if you tried to accumulate that many, your child wouldn't be able to digest it all. The purpose of having some flags is, as David said, to introduce the symbolism of nationality. We're just introducing the concept to them. And it leads our children into deeper research about it. So we're going to use those flags to inspire the child to go and research something else. So,
That's right.
which flags you choose to display or have in your home is really totally up to you. And there's no wrong answer. You could go with what you feel like are an array of the largest countries in the world, or you could go with an array of these, teeny tiny little national countries in the world,
Countries that are.
or you could do countries that are far away from you. You could do countries that are very relevant. So here in the United States, it would be very common to have a Canadian flag, a Mexican flag, a United States flag, and then maybe some of the flags in South America or
Caribbean and
Europe.
Central America.
Because that tends to be our cultural concept.
Other English-speaking nations in the U.S. So the
But
British.
part of the purpose is to expose our child to different cultures. So
Absolutely.
like my perfect array of flags would probably be, it would include our own national flag. It would include the bordering countries that are like right around our country. And it would also include like a little handful of flags that represent different countries in different continents. So I'd have a few flags from Asia, a few flags from, if I were designing one for the classroom, I would probably go with the continent approach. A few from this continent, a few from that continent, from, like the around the world. But as far as what you choose to include in your own home, these flags, if you want to purchase them, they're not very expensive. You can get a little pre-made bundle, of flags, or you can make your own. Either one is perfectly fine. And I would say like, for a great little starter set for home, I would go with like, I don't know, like maybe 5 to 10 flags to start out with.
Yeah. And
Just
there's
enough.
some really, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's some really fun flags out there too. In America, we have the stars and bars. Love it or hate it, it's not the most interesting when you look at the Bhutan flag. I look at this thing; it's amazing. Kids, even adults, we love looking.
And some can't see, so you kind of describe it. We've got a dragon.
That's right.
It's on a background of yellow and
it represents
red.
the Dragon Kingdom. So there's all kinds of like
Yeah.
getting a book of flags, like a DK book or something that shows the different flags of the world, it's really, really cool
Hmm.
because you'll see like the American flag with the stars and bars. There's symbolism there. Or you look at something like the French flag or the German flag with very bold colors. But then you find some really cool, interesting flags that go a really different direction with these intricate symbols on them, like
So
this
this
flag
one
from
says
Bhutan.
the dragon holds 4 jewels to show Bhutan's wealth and security. So specifically for that, and it snarls to show protection over the people. So
Yeah.
some interesting symbolism in a lot of the flags that are around.
So you might pick, I guess where I was going is like you might pick flags that are really interesting. You might look at flags with your child and then like, oh, look at this one. And then you want to go and maybe get a copy of that or print out a big version or buy a version of it that you can really look at and study. I was also thinking you might look at flags that are relevant to your family heritage. So when I was in college, I was really interested in Scotland because my last name is Hargis, and that's a Scots-Irish name. And I was like, where did that come from? And so I got really interested in Scottish flags from history and so forth. And that can be true for little ones as well. So if you have Chinese heritage, if you have German heritage or whatever, looking at the flags from those different cultures can also be fun if it has relevance to you. And that's what it's about. It's not about picking the flag per se. It's about picking the thing that just kind of sparks joy.
Yeah. Maria Montessori has this beautiful quote that's quoted so often. She said in a lecture which is captured in the book Education and Peace, if you want to go look that up. It's a really great book of Maria Montessori's lectures. And she said, establishing a lasting peace is the work of education. All politics can do is keep us out of war. And I keep coming back to this quote. I know it's said so often. And yes, in Montessori, we have this great emphasis on peace education, which really starts from the self, learning conflict resolution between two children or children and adults, in a family type of situation. But Maria Montessori really saw this work of peace education as being a very broad and all-encompassing in the Montessori classroom. Usually, I have seen Montessori classrooms and created in my own, like a peace shelf where there are some peaceful activities. We often might have a set of emotion cards, that sort of thing, maybe a peace table. Mm-hmm. But the peace curriculum actually is supposed to infiltrate all the other subject areas. It should be present in some way on the geography shelf, the science shelf, the language shelf, the math shelf. It's like the art shelf. Like it is it's so important that peace education should just infiltrate every aspect of learning.
Totally.
And she really believed it. And so when you think about what is going on in the world today, I know that it can feel very daunting, the idea that you could have something like lasting peace. Can you imagine a world without conflict? Dare we hope for it? Maria Montessori really pushed very greatly. She really seemed to believe deep down in her heart that a lasting peace among all people of the world was possible.
Totally. Absolutely. I mean, she came of age in a time of immense change and conflict, right? She was born in 1870s, is that right? And lived into the 50s, 1950s. So she lived through 2 world wars. Was really directly affected seriously by the second, had to flee the country, lived in India in a kind of exile for kind of many of her final years. She did writing and things, but saw the effect of Nazism and in the Montessori schools that she had helped establish or had been established throughout Europe in the 30s. And what happened to them and to the children. I mean, it's we won't go into the details. It's a troubling and predictable story, and she saw that firsthand. She also was a person of faith, and she, I think, really believed in the concept of the Prince of Peace, and so she saw the conflict and the horror of war, the horror of the trench warfare, the horror in the World War I, the horror of World War II. And she also saw the failure of things like the League of Nations in the 20s. And then at the end of her life was alive when they were trying this new thing called the United Nations, which was still in its infancy when she passed on. But she was there. She was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize late in her life. So there was this kind of movement toward peace with
more
the UN.
than once.
That's right. That she saw in the UN and had this kind of hope for it. Now, the UN has many, many, many problems, but I think for Maria, especially a person in her age, she saw a real hopefulness that there could be an organization dedicated to peace, to keeping us out of war. But as she said, she had a realistic expectations. All the UN really could do is maybe keep us out of war. If we really wanted to have peace, you had to change the inside, right? You had to change the soul. And that's where she said that's why she meant by education. So when we do these lessons, and when you do flag lessons and you start to lead to these thoughts around, well, who got to decide where this line is, and who gets to decide which flags get to be in the United Nations or not, and what mechanisms did we as humans use over the centuries and millennia to make that determination, and how often was it bloodshed, and can we imagine a different way, and why is there war, and why do people fight, and is there something that can be done to prevent that or to mitigate it? What can we do to help children imagine a different way of life, and not just kind of rely on the last gasp, which is the last hope is politics. Like when it comes down to politics, you're sort of it's your last best hope, right? You want to, what she was interested in, what can we do to help people grow, to help human society grow, so that we don't get into World War II again, so that the UN is redundant. We don't need an organization designed for peace because we live in peace. And, it's a hippy dippy idea, I suppose, but it's also something that a lot of us have organized our lives around. We believe that this is our mission. And yes, we will never see it in our lives, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't spend every minute trying to make that happen. Just because it's impossible doesn't mean you should try. You shouldn't try.
That's right. And it takes a lot of bravery to embark on these kind of discussions with our kids, and to help raise children who see themselves not as just a member of their own nation, but as a member of a global nation.
Right.
Yes.
That's right.
And a big part of that is helping our children understand the different perspectives of different people, as you have mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what if you don't have a set of flags at home, what to do about that.
Well, as Janelle has pointed out in our comments, the Montessori services have a great selection. There are a lot of places online that sell these little flags. And so you can always go find a set. If you really want to go less expensive, though, there are lots of printable versions that you can find for free. Just search for the different flags. You can find them and print them at home. And these work fine, because the idea is, again, it's not about the flag itself. It's about this kind of, what does the flag represent, and the symbol, and getting kids to start thinking about, when you get kids to start to recognize these flags, then they're ready to have the next step conversation. Right. So if they can recognize the Chinese flag, and they can recognize the American flag, and they can recognize the South Korean flag, they could start to then also think about, well, what is the relationship amongst these different groups? And it's very complex. And that then, so it's like a gateway to it. So go and print one out from online, and maybe stick it to a pencil or something. You could tape the flag to a little pencil and stick that in a jar.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, pretty easy. You could use a toothpick, and flags are really not hard to learn about. You don't even have to print one out. You could just draw it.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, they're also just, we talked about that, or cut them out of paper. I mean, there's all sorts of fun crafts you can do related to flags. But I mean, as always with any of these on the essentials, don't let the material restrict you. Don't feel like if you don't have the little precise flags that sit on the little nice stands, those are really wonderful. But if you don't have them, or you don't have the money, or you don't have the time to get them, or your kid's just suddenly really, really, really interested in Australia, go print out the flag. It's okay. They'll love it. And you can then use that as a gateway to all these other concepts. So no barriers allowed. Only imagination.
That's right. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for joining us today, friends. If the Montessori method is calling to you and you're inspired to have some fun with flags, don't hesitate to take advantage of the sale on Folk.
Yeah, childoftheredwoods.com/sale. It's 50%
Yep.
off for the next 36 hours.
Yes. All right. And if you have questions or feedback, we're available at hello@childoftheredwoods.com.
That's right.
We would love to hear your thoughts and insights.
We're going to be off for a couple weeks. So we will see you later in July with another essential. We're talking about nonfiction books.
All right.
All right, everyone,
Have fun,
stay cool out
friends.
there. It's hot.